Okay, the Arctic fox. The Arctic fox also has a coat that changes during the winter from a brown summer coat into this very thick white fur to help the fox blend into its surroundings. The fur also covers its feet so it can walk on snow and ice. Thanks to the fox's fur, it can hide and sneak up on birds, hares, and rodents like me.
You know, I noticed, Mr. DeStefano, that the Arctic fox changes its fur in the summer and in the winter. So it changes in the winter to keep warm, and in the summer it, has less fur so that it can stay cool.
So that's kind of like us when in the wintertime we wear heavy coats, kind of like the thick fur of the Arctic fox. And in the wintertime we wear shorts and t-shirts so we have less clothing on, and that keeps us cooler.
Wow, the animals are just like us.
Yes, they are. Let's move on to our next Arctic animal, the Arctic hare. What animal does that look like to you, Mrs. Kanda?
Well, Mr. Stefano, that looks like a bunny.
It does, but this is called a hare, and I always get confused between the difference between a bunny and a hare. Can you tell us? Help me out, Mrs. Kanda. How do I know the difference between a bunny and a hare?
Well, this is actually a pretty cool fact because a lot of people think that they're the same thing, and actually a hare is bigger than a rabbit, or what we sometimes call a bunny.
Wow, that's so interesting. Well, let's read and find out some more about the Arctic hare. The Arctic hare's white coat becomes much heavier in the winter. Its ears are smaller than those of other hares, meaning less of its body is exposed to the cold. In other words, this is no place for critters with long dangly ears unless they have long dangly earmuffs to keep those ears from freezing. The hare's white coloring also helps it hide in the snow, and its back feet are wide and large, like small snowshoes, so it can run fast in the snow.
I just think it's interesting, Mr. Stefano, that the hare is similar to the Arctic fox because he also has a thicker coat in the wintertime, and he also changes colors.
Yeah, he does. So he's look at how he's blending in with the snow. Isn't it kind of hard to see the hare? Why is it good that the hare is the same color as the snow, Mrs. Kanda?
Well, I think that if someone were coming after him to maybe make him a snack, they would have a really difficult time finding him in the snow because he blends right in.
Yeah, he does. So it's kind of good strategy. It's a good feature that he has, a good adaptation. It helps him to protect himself by being able to hide.
Right.
Oh, there's our friend Rattenborough in the seascape.
My goodness, that looks very chilly.
Remember, this text is nonfiction or real, but Rattenborough is fiction. He's not real. There are other kinds of habitats in the Arctic besides the tundra, and different kinds of plants and animals live in these other habitats. The Arctic Ocean is a habitat rich in sea life and animals that rely on the sea for their food. The water is so cold in the Arctic Ocean that most living creatures would be able to stay alive only a few minutes in it.
I would think you'd have to have some really special adaptations to live in such a cold environment, especially in the water.
I think so too. Now let's read about walruses. Animals such as the walrus call the Arctic Ocean home. These huge creatures just love the icy water and can swim around for a long period of time. Walruses have adapted to life in the ocean by storing blubber under their skin. So blubber is a fat that some animals have, and it helps them to keep warm. Blubber prevents heat from escaping their bodies. Walruses also have long teeth called tusks, which they use almost like arms to pull themselves up out of the water and onto the ice. So Mrs. Kanda, why do walruses have those tusks?
Well, it's kind of interesting. They use those tusks almost like we would use arms to pull ourselves out. If we were in the water, we would use our arms to pull ourselves out. They use their teeth, it looks like their teeth, with those tusks to pull them out.
Wow, that is so interesting. and even the blubber that they have, it's not that they just like to eat a lot. It's not that they just ate too much of the wrong stuff, but
No.
their blubber actually has a role. They actually need that blubber to keep them warm and to help them to survive in the Arctic.
It's kind of cool when you compare like the hare. He grows fur to stay warm, whereas the walruses have blubber to stay warm.
Yes. So all these different features that we're reading about really help these animals to be able to live in the Arctic. Okay, so now we're looking. Do you know what these are, boys and girls?
Those are called seals.
Awesome. Seals. Look at these cute animals.
They
They
are
are,
so cute.
yeah, they are. They are seals. Seals have blubber under their skin, just like walruses. So if we learn about why walruses have blubber, why do seals have blubber?
Well, probably they keep themselves warm as well, because I mean they're still in a very cold environment.
That's right. Some types of seals are born covered under a layer of white fur to keep them warm until they develop blubber. Seals are incredible swimmers. Like fish and walruses, seals don't have arms and legs. Instead, seals have flippers, and they swim by wiggling their bodies from side to side, using their flippers to steer. So they use their flippers to move in different directions. They swim very fast, so they catch plenty of tasty fish. Thankfully, they don't eat rats. Good for Rattenborough.
I know.
Okay, now we have the polar bear. Now look at the polar bear is white.
He is.
We know that in the Arctic, we see lots of snow. So how might the white fur help the polar bear?
You know, that white fur may really help him to blend into his surroundings so that he could catch food.
And so that, and also his enemies won't be able to find
Yeah.
him either. Yeah, and also to catch food too, to hide, so like the different animals that he wants to eat will not be able to see him. Good point, Mrs. Konda. Here comes a polar bear. Look out! Let's hide behind this rock, and I'll tell you about this amazing creature. The polar bear is perhaps the best known of all the animals living around the Arctic Ocean. These astonishing animals have adapted incredibly well to the harsh Arctic habitat. Polar bears are the largest bears in the world. Male polar bears weigh up to 1,700 pounds. It's probably heavier than everyone in your class put together, including your teacher. And polar bears grow up to 10 feet from head to toe. Yikes. So think of those tall basketball players we watch on TV, and the polar bear is taller than them.
Wow. So he weighs a lot and he's very tall. I don't know if I would want to meet a polar bear.
I definitely would not, unless maybe I was at the zoo and the polar bear was behind the glass there.
Agreed. It's the only time I want to meet a polar bear.
Yes, definitely not if I'm going to the Arctic sometime.
Nope.
Polar bears are covered with a heavy coat made up of 2 layers of fur, and they have a layer of blubber under their skin. I wonder why they have blubber, Mrs. Konda.
You know what's pretty cool is that some of the animals were just, like I mentioned, that they just had blubber or they just had fur. This polar bear has both fur and blubber, I noticed.
Wow, so they have their blubber to keep them warm.
And they have
And
their
fur to keep them warm too, yes.
So they kind of have, it's almost like they're wearing like a double coat, or, 2-layer coat.
Yeah, as we've been learning, it gets really cold in the Arctic, so they really need
I bet.
the layers to stay warm. Their ears and tails are very small, so that not too much of their bodies are exposed to the cold weather. It is a good thing they have all that fur and blubber and sharp claws, because polar bears spend most of their life living on sea ice, chunks of ice that float in the Arctic Ocean. Sometimes polar bears take a dip in the icy Arctic water to swim from one chunk of ice to another, and they have webbed paws, sort of like duck's feet, to help them swim. They use those mighty paws to hunt their favorite food, seals. Those cute seals, poor seals.
I know, I couldn't imagine eating a seal.
Like all living things, polar bears need water to survive, and they get that water from melted snow and ice. So let's go on to the next one. Now we're going to see a polar bear. Oh, a polar bear with a cub.
Well, there's a baby polar bear.
Yes. Even though adult polar bears spend most of their time living on sea ice, polar bear babies or cubs are born on land. So what's a polar bear baby called? A
A
cub.
cub.
Their mothers, female polar bears, burrow. So burrow kind of means to go down and like
Digging a hole.
digging a hole in the ground. So they burrow or they dig a hole in the snow to make a den. Okay, so they dig a hole and they make the den is a kind of shelter. So it keeps out the snow and the bad weather. They will then hide in the den when they have their babies. They stay in the dens with their young all winter. And in the spring, they finally come out. The cubs stay with their mothers for almost 2 years to learn hunting and survival skills before leaving home.
Wow, polar bear babies leave their moms at 2 years old. I don't think I would want to have left my mom at 2 years old.
No, me neither. Definitely not. Now, speaking of home, I really must go. It's absolutely frigid here, and my whisker warmers just aren't doing the job. We've learned a lot about the Arctic habitat and the animals that have managed to adapt and survive here. I think our next stop should be somewhere warmer, don't you? Remember that even habitats as extremely cold as the Arctic tundra and the Arctic Ocean can be full of life. Now, it's not easy for me to stay hidden in all this snow, and I can barely move with all these clothes on. So I'm getting out of here before I'm spotted by that Arctic fox. See you next time.
Well, that was a really nice story, Mr. DeStefano. I'm wondering, can you describe the Arctic tundra habitat to us?
Well, the Arctic tundra is very cold and it's windy. The ground is frozen and it's covered with ice during the winter. And there's very little sunlight. But in the summertime, the top of the ice melts and the ground gets wet and muddy, but it doesn't have any trees. Mrs. Kunda, can you describe the Arctic habitat, or the Arctic Ocean habitat, sorry?
Yeah, so I think you'd find very cold water, and that cold water would be too cold for many living things to live in for a long time. And the animals that live there would have to have adaptations to help them to live there. And I think it would be covered with a great deal of ice.
Okay.
Mr. Stefano, why do you think it's important for living creatures to adapt to the environment in which they live?
Well, if they don't adapt, they're not going to survive or they're not going to stay alive. So they have to adapt in order to stay alive. Like in the Arctic, it's so cold that they have to have the blubber and the fur. If they didn't have that, they would freeze and then they wouldn't be able to live in that environment. So Mrs. Kunda, it's your turn to answer a question. What kind of plants grow in the Arctic tundra?
You know what? They have a lot of moss, so that's really close to the ground, and grasses. So anything that grows there is really close to the ground.
Okay, so that's the way they've adapted, by growing close to the ground.
Mr. Stefano, how have walruses, seals, and polar bears adapted to keep warm?
Okay, I'm going to give our boys and girls at home 3 seconds to answer this before I do, because we've had this several times, so they should know. Go ahead.
What do you think?
Did you say that they have fur coats and a layer of blubber under their skin? If you did, you're correct. All right, Mrs. Kunda, how have walruses adapted so they can move from the water of the Arctic Ocean onto chunks of floating ice in and near the Arctic Ocean?
I have to say, I thought this was pretty cool. They have these long tusks that they use to pull themselves out of the water and onto the ice.
Okay.
Mr. Stefano, can you describe how polar bears have adapted to live near the Arctic Ocean?
Well, they have that layer of blubber. They have 2 layers of fur. They have small ears and tail and a small tail. They have sharp claws and webbed paws. So the webbed paws help them swim in the water. They have sharp claws to help them move in the snow. Their fur and their blubber keeps them warm. And their ears and tails are small, so that they don't get like all, if they have bigger ears and longer tail, they'd be colder because they'd have that wind blowing on more of their body.
Yeah, so they just kind of keep it closer to their body.
Okay, and the last question is for Mrs. Kunda. So a habitat for an animal or plant must provide food, water, and shelter. Is the Arctic a good habitat for the polar bear?
Mr. Stefano, I have to say it is. And the reason I say this is because a polar bear can find food because they like to eat seals. There's water because, you can, snow is frozen water, so they can eat the snow and have water. And there's shelter, they build dens, or they find a den.
Very good, Mrs. Kunda. Well, boys and girls, thank you so much for listening today. We miss you. Um, we hope that you'll do your journal article, your journal entry. We'll have it posted on the class story of Class Dojo, and we will see you next time.
We miss you so much, first grade.
Bye-bye.
Bye.